welcome back to Nostalgiacast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we'll be discussing 1986's Little Shop of Horrors, directed by Frank Oz and starring Rick Moranis, Ellen Greene, Steve Martin, and the voice of Levi Stubbs. We have a special guest, David Rosen of the Piecing It Together podcast. Just so excited to chat with him. He's been one of my, like I said last episode, one of my podcasting idols that I've been listening to for I don't know how long, and so it's just amazing that we're able to chat with him, this person that I admire so much listening to. But before we get into that, we want to recap last week's movie, which was Cloak and Dagger, from 1985, I believe. Richard Franklin, Dabney Coleman, Henry Thomas, three names that should be very familiar to people if you know your movies. That was your pick, Johnny. How did we come down on Cloak and Dagger?
Yeah, I think we both agreed it was worth remembering. It's a very family-friendly movie. It's a, espionage spy movie that is geared more towards kids, but I think there are some things in there that adults can enjoy. And I think we both agreed it handled the suspense very well. It did what it was supposed to do. It was a lot of fun, although not very realistic, but that was part of the fun. So.
Right, absolutely. I think it was, those kids' movies, they're not always 100% believable, but I think they did enough to make us buy into their world. And like we talked about, that father-son dynamic was just something that I just really, really, really admire. They did a really good job with that. But then you're right, like some of the 80s stuff in it, obviously some of the filmmaking was top-notch, and other stuff was very indicative of the time it was made. Also the music, you had some thoughts about the music last time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the score was very outdated. It was almost too much. Sometimes it was off-putting, but that's how it was back in the 80s. So
yeah, and the emotions and the acting, I think, just sold itself pretty well. You didn't need all that extra stuff, but that's the 80s for you. It's excess. So again, that was Cloak and Dagger. Very, very good movie. Very underrated, underseen movie. If you guys ever get a chance to check it out, I know it's been playing on the Peacock. If it pops up on Netflix or Amazon, just it's 2 hours about. Just give it a shot. I think you guys would really enjoy it. It's got a lot of good stuff going for it. So let's talk about Little Shop of Horrors with again our special guest David Rosen. But before we do that, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
All right, sounds good.
It all began in this little shop.
Ow! Damn roses!
Where, strange as it seems, something extraordinary happened.
I'm afraid it isn't feeling very well today.
No, it's not. Bizarre.
What kind of a weird plant is that, Seymour?
Little Shop of Horrors, a story about a boy.
I've given you sunlight. I've given you rain. Looks like you're not happy. Unless I open a vein. Where did you get such a weird plant?
A girl.
You don't need a nice voice when you live on Skid Row, Mr. Mushnick. See, now this is my Dave, my boyfriend.
A florist.
I'm telling you, Audrey, he's not a good, clean kind of boy.
He's a professional.
You'll be a 10. You have a talent for causing things. Hey, I'll be a 10. People will pay you to be inhumane.
I've been saving all month for this. I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
Feed me Seymour.
And a plant.
Feed me all night long.
How am I supposed to keep on feeding you?
Whoa! Catch me now. I'm just a mean green mother from outer space, and I'm playing. I'm just a mean green mother from outer space, and it looks like you've been had.
Yes!
Rick Moranis.
Man's a total disgrace to the dental profession.
Ellen Greene.
Excuse me.
Excuse me, what? That's better.
Vincent Gardenia. With special guest appearances by Steve Martin, John Candy, and Bill Murray.
It's your professionalism that I respect.
Little Shop of Horrors.
Okay, so Little Shop of Horrors, directed by Frank Oz, 1986. Johnny, we wanted to welcome our next special guest, David Rosen from the Piecing It Together podcast. How are you doing,
welcome, David?
Hey, thanks so much for having me, you guys. This will be fun.
Yeah, I was telling Johnny the other day, it's like, I can't believe, like, I listen to not a lot of podcasts, but there are a select few that I'm just in awe of. And yours is one of them. So I can't believe, like, we chat on Twitter.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and we have like conversations and stuff like that. I can't like I kind of put the feel like, hey, would you like to come on our podcast? And you were like all for it. And so I was like, oh no, what do I do? So it's it's just one of the. But yeah, it's like over the past year, especially with our mutual friend Jason from Binge Movies, like I started really listening to him really heavy, and then obviously hearing you on the podcast, and I started listening to yours. And how many episodes do you have as of right now?
Way too many. I think we're at 216 of the regular numbered ones, but if you count up all the extra ones as well, we're over 300 at this point.
Wow. And how do you do it? How do you?
I have no idea. And then I also produce Awesome Movie Years and another movie podcast. So we got that on top of that, which is weekly, full 52 a year. And so, yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. It just keeps taking up more and more of my time. But what can I say? I love watching movies and talking about them. So, I got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's 216. Wow. Like Jonny and I are like this will probably be like an episode in almost the 50s. So we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
But again, it's just one of those things I'm in awe of, and just your format of your podcast, and just the way that you're able to, and I think I wrote you about it, just the way that you're able to not go right in and start criticizing movies. It's like you're taking the bits and pieces. And so over the course of every episode of your podcast, we get a picture like you guys do. You put together a puzzle picture of what the movie feels like, and how you feel about it. How did you come up with that idea for the podcast?
Well, I wanted to do something different, basically, just because there's already so many like great podcasts that just straight up review a movie. And so I wanted to come up with something different. And I did find a lot of the times when I was talking about movies, whether I was I also have another podcast, Bird Road, which is more like politics and culture, but movies come up there all the time as well. But whether I'm talking on there or just talking with friends or whatever, a lot of the times conversations do go to, oh yeah, it's it's this meets this, or these kind of movies combined and whatnot. And so it kind of lent itself to what I ended up coming up with for the concept of the show. And I just eventually landed on the idea of puzzles as the kind of glue to put it all together. But just putting together different movies to make up what the current release is.
Yeah, it's like no movie's made in a vacuum. So a lot of movies are going to be inspired by or have, and so that's something that we talk about all the time. It's just there's really nothing new under the sun. There's just basically new ways of.
Yeah, and I like celebrating that, because like that's just what's going to happen. There's no getting around it, so we might as well celebrate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, great idea, and you just have it down to a format and everything. So with you've got podcasts going on. I know you just got married, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, we managed to get our honeymoon in before everything's going to shut back down or something. Who knows what's going to happen?
Right.
Yeah, this world's crazy, but we just managed to get our wedding to happen and go on the honeymoon, and now we're back to working on all our stuff. My wife's a photographer, so I help her with her photo shoots and all that, and then I work on music. We also have a record store here in Las Vegas, Wax Tracks Records.
Whoa.
That's where I work during the day, so everything is entertainment related. Anything that I'm involved with.
Wow, that's crazy. How do you keep like your head on straight? That's nuts.
More stuff I gotta do. Yeah, I know. We also have a dog and 3 cats, so there's that too.
So you've been, how long would you say you've been at the podcasting game? I know we've talked about how many episodes, but how many years have you been at this?
I think it's been about 5 years total, including like everything that I've been involved with. Like Bird Road, I think we started like about 5 years ago, and then I kind of spun off into piecing it together a little over 4 years ago. And since then, just continuing to build more things on top of that. I was producing a restaurant podcast for a while, and I've done music for various podcasts. I produced a couple others, like just episodes here and there, did some editing and whatnot. Just all different kinds of podcast related projects.
Wow. Yeah. Like I said, that's impressive, especially like I said, the way that you have the format down and everything like that. So, and again, another thing that I love about piecing it together is there's the big brouhaha these days about how like the big blockbuster movies are taking over cinemas, and
Mm.
you go to a movie theater, a movie house is playing 12 has 12 screens, and 10 of them are playing Spider-Man, and
Yeah.
only one of them is playing West Side Story. So what I like about piecing it together is you do the big blockbusters, you do the Avengers movies, you do like Black Panther, you do again, you just had Jason on for Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Yeah.
But I've written, and then you just did an episode on Spider-Man with Kevin Guti. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah. Gucci. Yeah.
Of the Gutting the Sacred Cow, and then Venom, and then Malignant. I think I wrote you and said I was listening to that today. Great episode.
That movie's just the best. Isn't it?
It's a real fun movie and a real fun conversation. But again, you talk about like Titan, and Serenity of all things. I know you had like Kristen Lopez on for that. I know Under the Silver Lake and The Lighthouse. You had B. Gardner, who I talk to every now and then. And again, just one of those. Twitter's great because I talk to people and they talk back, and it's like, whoa, I didn't expect that to happen. So all these people that I chat with, and you have them on your podcast, and you don't just do the blockbusters, you do everything, and you're able to chat again about older movies and newer movies. And so that's, again, I'm sorry to keep blowing smoke, but that's just one thing that I love about the podcast.
I'm so glad that you like it. And I mean, I love trying to mix it up with the big movies and the small movies. I mean, somehow we ended up landing on our episode 200 was Danzig's movie, Death Rider and the House of Vampires. I mean, that is as random as you could get for a big celebration like a 200th episode, but it was a fun movie. And we try to do all different kinds of things, and you have to cover Spider-Man, and I had fun talking about Spider-Man, but at the same time there's all these other great movies to cover too.
Yeah, it's not just the blockbusters, it's just a whole feast of stuff out there. As far as your composing goes, again, I'm fascinated by that. I know Brian Scuttle is a mutual friend of ours, and he's a composer. And Jonny, again, he's a musician, and we don't talk as much about his passes being in bands and recording albums. And so I thought this would be a good kind of way to, again, another meeting of the minds, and let Jonny kind of chat with you about that. But let me ask you first, how long have you been composing? What's your experience with that?
That has been pretty much like 20 years now, and I professionally like 15-16 years, something like that. And I mostly am composing music for films, but I do put out albums of instrumental music, and I have collaborated with other artists and stuff like that. But the majority of what I've done has been scores for films, both features and short films, as well as like commercials and things like that. And I do a lot of music that goes through like the library system for getting licensed into like TV and commercials and stuff like that as well. And I just, music has always just been such like an important thing to me. And especially my family, we have our record store, like I mentioned, and so I grew up around music my entire life. It's always just been completely around me at all times. And I love the idea when it comes to like composing and like making film scores and stuff like that. It's just, I get to kind of lock myself in a room and work on music until it's done. And I the idea of being in a band sounds fun-ish, but I'd much rather just be, kind of putting my creativity into something. And when it's done, it's done. And of course you have to collaborate with the filmmaker in that case, but at least the musical portion of it is just something that I get to come up with.
Yeah. How would you describe like your composing style? Like what other artists would you say you're even if you're, I'm not trying to say you're like the same as other artists or anything, but like if you could compare yourself, or say the kind of style that you try to go for, who would you compare yourself to?
It's actually like a kind of difficult question, only because I tend to work in a lot of different styles. I mean, when I put out my albums of instrumental music, I mean, I always say my three biggest influences are The Cure, Depeche Mode, and Nine Inch Nails. So like that for what I put out under my name, David Rosen, I have 9 albums out under that name. And that's kind of what I'm going for there. It does blend electronic music with more ambient music, with alternative rock type music, and with film score sounding stuff as well. But then when I'm working on films, it's really just all over the place. I kind of just try to be a chameleon and work on what is needed for the film I'm working on. I do tend to work on much more dark stuff than anything. That's really, if I had to like use one word, it would be dark. Whether that means, it's like a dark drama or a mystery or horror movies, stuff like that. I definitely dark stuff is kind of my bread and butter when it comes to composing.
Right, right. And I hope it doesn't sound like an insult, but from what I've heard, what I've listened to from music, I get some Vangelis vibes
Sure.
from your stuff as well. And I
Love Vangelis. Absolutely. Yeah.
as a fan of his and all the stuff that he's done, it's just wow. I like the kind of not totally similar, but it does remind me of that.
Yeah.
So Jonny, were there any questions you wanted to ask him about being a composer? About
Sure, yeah, David. When Darin told me we had you on as a guest, and he told me you did composing for films, I was kind of jealous because it's kind of been one of my dreams to do something like that. And I've only done the scores for movies that Darin and I have made together when we were younger. So
Yeah.
never professionally, but as you said, I was in a band for many years, and I played the piano, the drums, and the guitar. And you're right, being in a band it's not as much fun as people think it is. I mean, the on the stage part, the performing, that's the fun part for me. The recording, the studio part, and of course the writing the songs. But keeping the band together and all the different personalities and the dynamic, that's hard. That's hard to deal with. So it's been a while since I've been in a band, but it's been kind of a nice kind of break from having to deal with that.
Sure.
But yeah, my question for you is how'd you get into that? Like, how did you actually start to make money composing music for films? Like, how did you fall into that profession?
Honestly, for me, it's a long journey of just doing every single thing I could get my hands on. And some of them were, crap, and some of them were great, and some of them didn't pay, and some of them did pay, and just working on as much as I could. I've always been someone who kind of, and nowadays not so much, especially now that my time is spread thin, and I obviously gotten so into podcasting these last 5 years, and so I really have to kind of pick and choose nowadays. But for the longest time, it was like, oh, you need music? Yes. Like, even if it's outside of my wheelhouse, even if they wanted, like, I worked on some really weird stuff in the early days, working on like silly jingles and stuff like that. And like I said, I kind of gravitate towards darker music, so that's like as far as you could get. But it's like, yes, I want to work on any and everything I can, and I'd say that's kind of the path I took into getting more and more gigs.
Okay, very cool. When you compose, do you actually watch the entire film all the way through before you start to write a single note, or do you have something in mind beforehand? Like, how's the process usually work?
Almost always. I'd have to say it's different on every project, but almost always I watch it one time through at least, and maybe just jot like very, very rough ideas down, like like a few little bullet points along the way. And then I'll usually, if it's a short, I don't really have to do this, but if it's like a feature, and I've worked on about 10 or 12 features at this point, but if it's a feature, I'll chop it up into scenes just to kind of make it a little more manageable. But if it's a short, I just throw the whole thing right there in my DAW and just start tapping away, trying to figure out what I want this thing to sound like, and usually go back and forth with the director a little bit as I'm getting started. But then once I kind of lock into what I'm thinking, then I just kind of go full steam ahead.
That's cool. So being a drummer myself, I've always wanted to score a film with just percussion instruments. It's always been like a goal of mine. And then I saw Birdman, and they stole my idea. So I was like, well, now I can't do it, but maybe one day. But that's cool, man.
Well, you talking about your music too, Dave. I listened to you had the episode where you did your commentary track for your self-titled, what was it, 6th album?
Yes.
And again, I think I said this word just barely, but it's infectious. Like, I know you talked about how proud you were and how excited you were by a lot of the tracks that you were writing. And I was like, this is great. Like, everybody should be this enthused by the work that they do. And it was funny because every time I would think that, you would apologize on the comment. I'm sorry that I'm like, if you listen to me a lot, like, you notice that I'm very prideful. But again, you should. It's just very good. It's good mood, ambient music. And it, like I said, it has that Vangelis, sometimes a Daft Punk feel too sometimes.
Sure.
And again, I'm not trying to say that you're ripping them off. It's just, if you're looking for that kind of quality sound, it's like, I think you've got a very personal voice.
Mhm.
and it's you, and it's just you're taking like again with the puzzle pieces, you're taking a lot of these elements, but you're making it your own, and I just
Exactly.
that's what I really like about listening to your music.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, yeah, like with the podcast, it's like you celebrating the fact that, inspirations come from all over the place, and it's important to like, acknowledge those things, I think, and that's part of what the podcast is about. And definitely with my music, I don't try to hide it at all when I'm, inspired by certain artists or certain songs or whatever. But yeah, I do. My friends make fun of me all the time because I do like the music that I make a lot. And so, and I do find I find it could be a little ridiculous at times to like your own music, but when my Spotify year end thing comes up and my name's in there, I'm like, oh God, but it is what it is, I like it.
So, I'm not a really big fan of movies that are underscored all the way through. Like, do you think it's important to just accent like certain scenes and like kind of like bring forth what you need for that moment, or are you a fan of the whole underscore throughout the entire movie? Like, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it really depends on the project. I think it's really important to know when to hold back and not have music. I mean, look at Darren Aronofsky's mother. Johan Johansson composed an entire score for it, and they decided to just throw the whole thing out and make it scoreless, the whole movie. And that was the right choice because that movie just works so well without a score. So it really just depends. I mean, for me personally, it's more fun when the director is like, just go crazy, do whatever you want. But even then, sometimes I'm like, well, actually, what I want is for this whole scene to not have any music to it because it's just the way that it's filmed. It just makes the most sense that way. But yeah, I mean, I do like to go big with a score, but it all depends on what the scene is and, what the movie needs.
What's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we, we're chatting about music, obviously and David said it's a good thing the movie that you chose, again, being a musical, Little Shop of Horrors. What, I guess the question with the movie, if we're going to dive right into it, is that what has been your experience with Little Shop of Horrors? I know you gave me like 3 choices, and I think running it by Jonny, I think we all are like, I think we'd really like to cover like a musical. Like we covered Popeye, which is a musical. We've covered Footloose, which I guess is like they don't really sing, but it's constant like songs on the soundtrack kind of thing. But as far as Little Shop of Horror goes, what has been your experience with it? What and I know you chose it as a puzzle piece for your Venom Let There Be Carnage episode.
Yeah.
Because that ties in. But what's been your experience with the movie itself, and why did you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I was trying to think, specifically in your format for this show of a movie that I loved as a kid and just haven't seen in a long time. And, I really was having a little trouble finding, ideas for it. But when I landed on this, I was like, yeah, I loved this movie as a kid, and I have definitely not seen it in at least maybe 30 years, or maybe at least 25 years. And going back to it, it was like really, really fun to like go back and like kind of revisit the songs, revisit the movie, the comedy, all these actors that we love so much that are in it. And before our recording, I told my mom I was going to be doing this, and I was like, we'll probably talk about the the actual stage musical at some point during this conversation. I was like, Mom, did I ever see that? And she was like, you saw it twice. We took you to New York to see it, and we saw it in Pennsylvania where I grew up. So I mean, this was like all around me at every moment as a kid. And so, it was really fun to go back and revisit it because I remembered the brushstrokes of it. And like you said, I brought it up in the Venom episode because, it definitely fits, but, I had forgotten most of the actual story, and it had been so long. So it was really great to go back to it.
Right. And then Jonny, what's been your experience with Little Shop of Horrors?
Yeah, well, like David, I haven't seen it in like 30 years. And I think when I first saw it, I saw it at a friend's house. And I remember only liking the Steve Martin scenes. Like, I really enjoyed those scenes. I didn't like the rest of it. I remember I did not like the Audrey character. I didn't like the way she looked. I didn't like her voice. And so that always bothered me, as a kid watching that and watching her scenes. But when I think of it, I think fondly of the Steve Martin bits and the Steve Martin dentist scenes. Okay.
And then as far as like my history goes, it's weird because when we watched, I I got the whole family to sit down and watch, which is hard to do, but they're off for the next 2 weeks. So I was like, get off your computer and let's come and let's watch a movie. It's from the guys that did like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. And so, it's going to be a lot. So we all sat down, and watching it this time, I know I've seen it before, and I think I've maybe seen it once. I remember the parts with Seymour feeding Audrey II, like dripping the blood into its mouth.
Yeah.
And making those kissing noises. That made me really uncomfortable when I saw it as a kid. And so that's really all I remembered. I remembered the Steve Martin part. I remembered the Bill Murray part. But after the movie was over, my wife asked me, have you seen this before? And I was like, I swear I did, but I only remember certain parts. And she goes, because you were doubled over with laughter. Like it was the first time you'd ever seen this. And so you were just guffawing and laughing so loud that I thought, oh, maybe he hasn't seen this before. And so it's just one of those things that I know I've seen it, but it just came in bits and pieces. I didn't remember that John Candy was in it. I didn't remember, Jim Belushi coming in. And so it's one of those things where you watch it and it's like kapow. It's like, why hasn't this been a bigger part of my life? I just got such a huge kick out of it watching it this time. So what let's go through like first impressions and stuff. Watching it again, Dave, what did you think about it now as opposed to watching it back then?
I loved everything about it right now, watching this last night. One thing that I like there's a lot I didn't remember about it, but one thing I specifically did not remember is just how slapsticky it all is, and like it almost feels like a spoof of musicals in a way, and I did not kind of expect that. Like, I knew of course it was funny and that it was going to be very ridiculous and silly, and that's the kind of stuff that I gravitated to as a kid. So of course I knew that was coming, but I just didn't realize it was going to be so slapsticky and so ridiculous. And I guess I should have known with some of the the cast members with Steve Martin and stuff like that, and Bill Murray being in there, who I completely forgot was in there, and like you said, John Candy. So I guess I should have knew that. I also loved the songs this time around, which I think, even though I definitely did love them as a kid, I think maybe I was a little too young to appreciate the lyrics, probably, like, most of like the little bits and pieces in the lyrics. The thing that stood out to me the most this time around, and this definitely, I don't think there's any way to appreciate it so much when you're 10 years old or whatever, but the production design and animatronics on Audrey 2 are just out of this world, like some of the best I've ever seen. Like, I just cannot believe how smooth and lifelike it moves and all that stuff. Like, that stuff is just insane. But these people are all just working at the top of their game at this moment in the 80s. And I loved it.
Yeah, it's Frank Oz. We talked about him in our Dirty Rotten Scoundrels episode, and just the way that he directs, and he's able to like kind of pull back and like let Steve Martin and Michael Caine do their thing, and so that's really important for comedy. Yeah. And just like you said, there were several times where I yelled out, "How in the hell did they do that?" When you see Audrey singing and Audrey II singing, and his lips are like quivering, and I was like, "How are they doing this?" Yeah. And especially with Frank Oz working with the Muppets and Jim Henson and stuff like that. I think Brian Henson actually was one of the puppeteers.
I think
for the
so.
movie. And reading like how did they did that, like they couldn't figure it out. Like the designers and the puppeteers, they were trying to figure out how to do it, and they couldn't really get it until they watched like the test footage back, and they slowed it down or they sped it up, and by speeding it up, it made it look more realistic. And made it move better. So they went back and they reshot stuff with them like moving in slow motion and stuff like that. Obviously, before we dive a little bit, like Johnny, you talked about how you only like the Steve Martin parts. What did you feel about it watching it this time?
Yeah, that was just when I was younger. This time it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun watching all the actors, seeing Bill Murray, seeing Christopher Guest show up, seeing Jim Belushi was in there too. I think at the end, that was really fun to watch him as well. I really enjoyed it. I was laughing out loud as well. I probably wasn't guffawing, but I was laughing.
Yeah, I remember I doubled over in the Steve Martin parts, especially. He's going for it. Just the way that I don't know if I buy him as an abuser, like a jerk or something, because the way that he moves during his dentist song is like very Steve Martinish, and it's fun, but it's not like, I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't really like match. Like, I don't buy him as a jerk so much as, just a larger than life presence. And it's funny because watching We went to go see Ghostbusters Afterlife, me and the wife, and she got more of a kick out of it than I did. Usually I'm the one that really geeks out, but she was like laughing and giggling at everything. And when, spoiler alert, when you get the original Ghostbusters that come in at the end, it's like she just loved that. And so we decided, let's go home and let's show the kids the original Ghostbusters. Like, again, make sure they sit and watch it so we can go and take them to this. And they loved the experience of Ghostbusters. The kids loved going to see Afterlife and getting all the fan service. And so when Bill Murray shows up, like, obviously they know that I like Steve Martin. When Bill Murray showed, the thing that surprised me is my whole family went, yes, like, because they just saw him and I was like, wow, like Bill Murray has made an impression on my family. It was so fun. I don't know. The way that you talked about the music, it's got like it's kind of almost sinister and it's dark and it's really playful and it knows what it is.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I noticed too, and maybe you guys agree with me, maybe you don't, is that it's a good musical first and foremost. The way that the camera, it doesn't just sit there. The camera moves and it reveals things, like especially with the Greek chorus, the girls, what were their names? The Crystal, Ronette, and Chiffon. How they kept revealing their dresses and they kept popping up in different parts of the stage. And it's just a really dynamically directed musical. So I think even without the comedy and stuff like that, even without the performers that we talked about, I think it still works as a full-blooded musical. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just a really good movie. It's really well made. All like I was saying about, production design on Audrey, but I mean, set designs are awesome. Like the whole Skid Row thing, like everything just looks so cool. And I've talked about this a lot lately in covering like movies over on Piecing It Together. But like when a movie, like you can feel that it's a big movie, it just gives it so much more when it just doesn't feel like a, no offense to the comic book movies, but when it doesn't feel like everything is just like a CGI set, it's like when you feel everything in the scene, and this really, really gets that. And yeah, everybody's just having so much fun. And, the vocal performances are great, especially Levi Stubbs as Audrey too. Oh my God, is he great? I said in my Letterboxd review, like I haven't done this yet, but I want to go look around and see if there's any behind the scenes footage of him like in a vocal booth doing that, because he is just so much fun in this.
Say I can't do anything I want. Like what? Like deliver, pal. Like see you get everything your sacred, greasy, hot desire. Serve you like a Cadillac car on a gas shot on jackpot. How about a date with Hedy Lamar? You're gonna get it if you want it, baby.
Johnny, you and I, we grew up being in musicals all through junior high and high school. What did you think of the staging and the musicalness of the movie?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, that's kind of what I want to talk about. Was I felt like I was watching a musical. I felt like I was in this theater sitting down watching the Broadway show. So that's what I liked about it. It was great.
Yeah, I don't know if either of you guys noticed. It's very stagey. Like you could tell every moment that it's on a stage. There's never a point where it seems, and we'll talk about the alternate ending and how that kind of opens up the universe. But I just liked how it felt like just of a piece, like all the way through, just very contained and very small world. And, the I Want song about Skid Row, and it's just, and it's Ellen Green. I know we talked about like actresses that have these high voices. I think she's doing it on purpose, obviously. So when she has the high pitched voice and then she belts it like a full, alto or something, I'm in awe of like everything. And even Rick Moranis, I think Rick Moranis might be the weakest singer in the movie, but he still pulls it off. He's not terrible. Johnny, you're making a face. What do you think about that?
He was on pitch, man. He was on key. He sang that he hit it. So
he did everything. I don't know if he like was as impressive as the Greek chorus singers or as Levi Stubbs or as Ellen Green or anything like. But yeah, I thought he did a fine job. Were there, Dave? I know you talk a lot about in your podcast about how like movies that inspired this movie. Let's kind of talk about the Roger Corman 1960 movie. Let's talk about the off-Broadway production. I have no experience with the off-Broadway show. I know that obviously Alan Menken and Howard Ashman are big as far as like the Disney Renaissance and how they wrote the music and the script for this and everything like that. But as far as that goes, I'm only familiar with the movie itself. How familiar are you, David, with the off-Broadway musical?
So yeah, I apparently saw it, but I was so young that I
Right.
don't remember. And so I
Right, you
actually
said
would
that, right.
really, I'd love to go see it again now after revisiting this movie and rediscovering how much I loved it. I really would love to go see it again because I bet it is just absolutely great. I mean, I could just picture some of these, these songs, how they must, translate to the stage.
Yeah, I think like reading the history at least of the play is that what was impressive. First of all, Ashman didn't ever want it to go actually on Broadway because I think he thought the small scale stage was a better fit for it. But from what I understand, just the way that they are able to make Audrey 2 grow on the stage as you're watching it, from what I understand, that was a very impressive thing to watch on the stage. Johnny, were you familiar with the play at all?
Well, I knew it was a play. In fact, one thing I kept thinking of was the show Head of the Class back in the 80s. They
Hmm.
actually had an episode where they put on the play Little Shop of Horrors. And
Huh.
so I kept thinking about Head of the Class doing the show while I was watching the movie. But have you seen that show before, Head of the Class?
With Howard Hesseman in it, right?
I think so, yeah. And what's her name? Leah
I think I
Remini?
remember that.
Yeah, it was a while ago. They had a
but
bunch of.
they did the show in the episode, and it was pretty funny.
Oh, that's interesting. I never realized
Nice.
that. Have either of you seen the Roger Corman movie?
I have not. I've always known that there was an original that, that it was based on, but I've never seen it and I need to.
Yeah, it's famous obviously for Jack Nicholson showing up. I think, it's a weird kind of, because the off-Broadway play was inspired by the movie, but then obviously it took on its own kind of personality. And then when they adapted it for a movie, they ported over, like the Bill Murray character is not in the off-Broadway play. He's more akin to the Jack Nicholson part for the 1960s version. As far as the history of that one, Johnny, have you seen that one?
No, I haven't.
I guess we're batting 1,000 here. I haven't seen it either. I know I've seen the Jack Nicholson parts. I know Roger Corman was either famous or infamous for shooting movies like within a week or within a couple days and just getting it all like on stage and stuff like that, or on set and having everything just shot like really fast and so I've never been a huge Roger Corman fan as far as like the aesthetics and the quality of it. But from the sound of it, obviously I want to see, and I don't know if it's in public domain, I want to see a lot of it. I know that when Audrey or Seymour or Eaton in the movie, like the plant Audrey 2, some of its sprouts are the faces of the people that he's eaten. And so I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to see that. That
sounds very Evil Dead 2-ish.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the end of Evil Dead 2, yeah.
So again, like with puzzle pieces and stuff like that, like especially with when he's singing Mean Green Mother from Outer Space and he has all the little buds that are coming out, that reminded me a lot of the Muppet Show, just the way that they're able to choreograph a lot of it. And obviously Frank Oz having a lot of experience with that. Were there, other than the inspirations of, the movie that inspired the musical, that inspired the inspiration, inspired the movie adaptation of the musical, were there any inspirations that you kind of picked out that inspired this one and that this one inspired? Does that make sense as a question?
Sure. Yeah, no, it does. The only thing is, though, I was having trouble with the timeline of it. And part of that is because of the fact there was the musical and there was the original Roger Corman and this. But yeah, a lot of the things I was thinking of were like 80s things that were right around this. And I don't know if they would have come exactly after or exactly before. I thought of the Super Mario Brothers Piranha Plant. I'm not sure which inspired which, but somewhere one of those must have. And the big thing to me, though, was the songs. And again, I'm not sure, where things were written, but I feel like there's so much Weird Al to this, like to the songwriting, like Nature Trail to Hell, and like some of his originals, not the parodies, obviously, but some of his originals and that kind of sense of humor that mixes like a really dark kind of, bloody, violent kind of sensibility, but with just silly, over the top goofiness. And I felt like there was a lot of Weird Al influence in the songwriting.
Yeah, I noticed too, like especially when Seymour starts murdering people
Yeah.
for Project 2, it took on like a Sweeney Todd kind of vibe for
Sure.
me too. Just the macabre kind of funny. I don't know. It's kind of again the same plot, really. Johnny, were there any like things that you noticed that inspired this movie?
Well, I don't know why, but I kept thinking of Rocky Horror Picture Show. I don't know why that kept coming to my mind while watching it.
Yeah.
There's some similarities as far as how it looks, and maybe some of the lighting choices were similar. So maybe that's why.
Well, I'm going to make a confession. I've never seen Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's on my list, but it's one of those things that I want to see with a midnight crowd. I don't want to watch it at home just on video because I don't think that's going to be the same. When Johnny, when you bring that up, especially, you know, Siskel and Ebert, I think they brought it up or Ebert, especially in his review, talked about how he thought that Little Shop of Horrors was going to take on the cult classic status of Rocky Horror Picture Show, where people would show up for midnight showings dressed as dentists and stuff like that. I don't know if it ever did, but it does have that same, from the clips I've seen of Rocky Horror Picture, it does have that same kind of anarchic kind of spirit to it. You know, Dave, you talked about Weird Al. I did notice, especially the "Somewhere That's Green" song that Audrey sings. Just the way that it's, and I wrote down here that I think it sets feminism back like a couple decades. Just the way that she wants to be have everybody over and have Tupperware parties. She wants to have the cartoon bird. She wants to cook dinner for them. She wants to have the kids and everybody go to bed at 9:15. And it even has lyrics of I think she says something about she's dating like a semi-sadist and stuff like that. Every single musical number had something like that in it where I was just laughing at because it knows it's a musical. Does that make sense? It knows what it's trying to do. And I really appreciate when a movie does something like that. Were there any particular songs that you guys like? I know, what was the one, Feed Me, you know, when they're talking about the murder, and it sings and Seymour is not really into it, and then he sees what's the dentist's name, Oren, is that his name?
I think so.
He sees him abusing Audrey, and all of a sudden it cuts and it's a full-on belted out music, like he's belting out his feelings, and I was like, that's good. Like, oh my gosh, they're really nailing that feeling. Were there, the two of you, did you have a favorite musical number?
I would probably just have to go with Dentist, just because, I mean, that's the one that stuck with me all these years, you know. But I did find this time around, though, Mean Green Mother from Outer Space is pretty much just as good. That song just rules.
Yeah, Suddenly Seymour was really funny too. I liked the reprise when it came back in. That shocked me. Johnny, what about you? What are your favorite numbers?
Yeah, I would agree with David. Dentist is my favorite, but Suddenly Seymour, I think, has the best melody that stays in your head, like it kind of sticks with you, and you can kind of sing along with it. And then I loved that when he asked her to marry him, she was like, "Seymour, this is so sudden."
Oh, Seymour, this is so sudden.
Will you?
That was pretty funny callback.
Yeah, and it just, oh my goodness, it just had so many of those kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just it's very naughty. Like it, you know, it has a lot of these things in it. And so, yeah, even the dentist, it has a great punchline. Again, I'm going to say it again. I kept laughing and laughing when it has that shot from inside the guy's mouth.
Yeah.
And you just see his tongue singing. I'm like, this is so clever. It's not lazy filmmaking on any level. Robert Painter was the cinematographer, and just working with Frank Oz and how he wanted to take it and make it less stagey. It's just, like I said, it really works as a musical. And the thing that as far as puzzle pieces go, I knew enough about the play that I knew Alan Menken used the Greek chorus. And so when I saw Disney's Hercules and he brings the actual Greek, the same Motown singers into it, I just think that's so clever. I thought that was just a wonderful throwback. I mean, obviously I have problems with Hercules, but the Motown girls are just such a clever way to kind of bring that back in and tie it in with Greek history.
Yeah, that is fun.
Yeah, so we're there. I even wrote here at one point, it's hard to take notes when there's so much choreography and so much imagination going on. Were there any, before we talk about like the alternate ending, Dave, were there any parts, I mean, if you wanted to name off parts that you were just in love with, obviously Dentist, obviously Steve Martin, obviously, were there any standout things? Like, did you find the movie sweet? Did you find it like heartfelt? Did you think it was, were you removed from it? What were the parts that you really, really enjoyed?
I think the other main thing to talk about is just Audrey himself. You know, Levi Stubbs as a voice, and just how incredibly animated, and not just animated in the sense of the production design and the animatronics, but his voice is in bringing that character to life. So just so much fun to watch, and just how into it he gets with all of his dialogue and his songs and everything like that. I mean, that's the stuff that really just makes this movie just so freaking alive, you know, and just so much fun to watch.
Yeah, and I talk about this quite a bit too. It's, you could have good music and you could have good singers, but the fact that they put so much heart and so much effort into the puppetry to make him seem, another note I wrote down here is, I said it says something for the movie that I buy a giant sentient plant being able to dial a phone. It was totally believable. Of course he's going to be able to do that, like, because they built it so much to that point, and they made him such a character. And again, everybody in this movie is just having so much fun. They know what they're there for, and they're not doing it in a way, Johnny and I, for a Christmas episode, we talked about the Jim Carrey Grinch, and just the way everybody's just going for the back, aiming for the back of the theater. And it's hard. There's a pitch that you need to go for. I think Grinch goes way overboard with it. It's too much, but I think this, it does. I don't know. I just thought it was perfect. I didn't think I didn't have any issues with everybody acting over the top. Everybody brought kind of a different energy. And I can't imagine the energy in the room when it's Bill Murray and Steve Martin in the same room together. And Steve Martin, I think he knows what his part is, that he's able to back off and kind of let Bill Murray be Bill Murray and do his ad-libbing stuff, because it's really funny, watching Bill Murray be into it, and it's a turnoff for Steve Martin's characters, because, and I liken it to serial killers. When you show fear, that's what they want. When you're into it, it's like, they kind of have a hard time with that.
You said earlier about how you used the word naughty, and I think it's funny, this movie, because it's like essentially feels like a kid's movie, but it's got some very adult humor in it, which also just kind of adds to just a very, like, almost dangerous, but in a funny way, kind of a vibe, which is just, I guess, kind of an 80s thing, not really something you see anymore.
Yeah, when he chops up Oren, and especially my kids are they're 20, they're 16, they're 12, and they're 8. And so just when he's chopping them up, and my wife and I kind of looked at each other, should we be watching this? But it's so happy about it. I don't know if that makes during the part where Seymour goes to kill Oren, and he has the gun, like, my kids were like on the edge of their seat, like, is he going to do it? And there came a point where he puts on the gas mask, and you can tell he's asphyxiating. And my daughter's like, oh no, don't do it. Like, you don't need to shoot him. And my son, my 12-year-old, we hear him go, don't worry, he's choking. It's going to be okay.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh. They were just they bought the vibe of it. And I get that he's chopping this guy up into pieces, but it's just the way that it's pitched. I don't know, when he's carrying the body down the stairs, and he looks away for a second, and the body like thumps down. I don't know. It just had that nice sense of humor. Johnny, were there any like bits and pieces that just stuck out to you?
Well, I wouldn't say anything in particular, but the whole thing as a whole, like, it was just took me for a ride. Like, just from the very beginning, like, I was into it from the very start, and I liked the dark turn that it takes. I liked that it goes that route, and that was really fun for me to watch. It kind of feel like a kid's movie, then go into this really adult, dark horror movie. It was kind of fun. I liked it.
Do you guys agree that because of the way that it's pitched and the way that it's kind of it builds to that you're right, it is a kid's movie, but when it gets to that, I still think it's joyous about it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, kind of when I mentioned Weird Al earlier, that's something I would say about his stuff too. Like his songs, they will have like so much just like really over the topness and like violence, but funny violence in it, which is something that I really have always appreciated. I've always just loved that kind of line between just really, really dark and really, really funny.
Yeah. Johnny, were there any like final thoughts about the movie itself that you had?
No.
Okay. Well, if we want to talk about have either one of you watched the alternate ending, the alternate cut?
I read about it. I have never seen it, and I'm gonna have to get that Blu-ray and watch it.
I've never seen it either.
Yeah, I know that it was one of the first DVDs that Warner Brothers released, and they released like that footage, but it was like unfinished. It was black and white, and some of it didn't have sound. And I think David Geffen or Frank Oz heard about it, and so they complained, or they talked to Warner Brothers, and they yanked the DVD. And so that's a collector's item. They didn't want to release it because it was unfinished. And then I think in 2011 or 2012, they did find the footage and they were able to restore stuff. There's the Jim Belushi character. Originally, it was Paul Dooley. That was that part. But he wasn't available when they did the reshoots. What basically happens at the end, if anybody's ever heard of it, is Audrey gets eaten. You know, the part where Audrey 2 like lures her in and eats her. Seymour is able to get to her, but he pulls her out, but she's mortally wounded. And she sings a reprise of Somewhere That's Green. And she basically tells Seymour, put me back in its mouth and let it eat me when I die so that we can be together. Like, and so he does that. And then he goes up and he's going to kill himself. But then he's confronted by the Jim Belushi / Paul Dooley character, who basically tells him, we want to take bits and pieces of Audrey 2 and we want to sell it. And Seymour realizes that's what's happening is Audrey 2 is planning that. So he goes down and confronts the plant, and that's where you get the mean green mother from outer space. But then, you know, we see in the movie how Seymour is basically beaten. And what happens is Audrey 2 pulls him from the wreck and he eats him and he spits out his glasses. And then it cuts to the Motown girls coming out. And they sing about how the plant like took over. And so it cuts to footage like King Kong-esque type footage of monsters like overrunning the country, and they're just eating everybody, and they're eating Boston, and they're eating New York, and it shows them on the Statue of Liberty. And then the plant breaks through the screen and tries to eat the audience. And so that's how the play ended. But when they presented this to a preview audience, I think Frank Oz says that they were just, every song was getting an applause. And as soon as Audrey dies and as soon as Seymour dies, they turned on the movie. And it said something about they needed to score a 55 to be able to release it. And it scored a 13.
Nice.
Wow.
People just hated it. And Frank Oz is like, well, we tried to, and in the play, it might be different. He says in the play, it's different because when they're eaten, at the end, they come out for a curtain call. And it's fun because you know they're not dead. But in a movie, it's finite, like they're dead. And so it just put a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And so that's when they went back and they reshot a lot of stuff, where you get the part where Seymour actually is able to beat Audrey 2. First of all, let me ask both of your opinion on it. What do you think, Dave, about that alternate ending? How do you think that would work compared to what we got?
Alternate endings are so hard because like you know the ending that you get, and it's like so hard to like look at them, you know, objectively. But I don't know, it sounds like a fun ending, and it's dark, which, you know, I do like, and I like that Audrey 2 wins. So I guess it's a cool alternate ending, that's for sure.
And we can pick and choose which we want from it. Johnny, what do you think?
Well, I think they made the right choice. I think it's better to have a happy ending than, you know, the darker everyone dies ending. Because I think too, like you say, they would screen it and find out what the audience thinks. And when the audience responds negatively, they go ahead and go with something more positive. So they made the right choice, I think.
Yeah, I think even when they're able to put together the actual footage as a director's cut, they did release it in the theaters and audiences did like that. But I think, Dave, it's more of what you're saying is it's nice having it as an alternate ending.
Right.
When you guys can check it out. I mean, it's fine. And it opens up the play where it takes place in other places and you see buildings and like Godzilla, King Kong-esque kind of stuff going on. I just thought watching, and it's nice having that out there. I just thought for the movie itself, you know, because it has the character arcs of Audrey and it has the character arcs of Seymour, like wanting to be the man and wanting to, you know, be her hero. And so that's what happens in the actual movie. And I like, if I had to choose, I would pick that one just because it seems more of a piece with itself. And then, like I said, I like that it keeps it kind of contained within the set and it doesn't really open it up. So everything feels of a piece. The main, besides Hercules, the main, and Sweeney Todd and anything else I talked about, the main puzzle piece with this that I want to talk about is it. When we talk about movies that had big reshoots, the ending, when you read about it, it reminded me a lot of World War Z, where they had like this ending that was a lot darker and it didn't work. And they went back and reshot like 25 minutes or something like that. And then you have other stories of like Pretty Woman had that kind of ending. I think Sunset Boulevard had an ending like that. You know, a whole history of movies that were reshot. But I guess my question is, I wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't told me that it was reshot. If I didn't know, it would have worked fine. It didn't seem like a reshot. And I kind of felt the same way about World War Z, is that if I didn't know that the ending was reshot, I thought it worked. what do you think about that? Is it, did you, knowing that there was a reshot stuff, do you think everything was shot perfectly? Do you think World War Z had a good reshot ending? Do you think, were there any cases of movies that that were reshot that did stick out like a sore thumb to you?
Well, first of all, I don't like World War Z, but that's another subject. But
right.
I don't know if it was tested at all, but I brought up Evil Dead earlier, but one that comes to mind is the alternate ending to Army of Darkness, which is a much darker ending, and they ended up changing it for a much more, happy ending ish, with Ash in the S Mart. So yeah, I mean, that's an example of, them filming two completely different endings and going with the happy one, which I think is also probably the right choice.
Yeah. And you bringing up Army of Darkness, I know you've talked about it a few times in your podcast, and that's something that Jonny and I love as well. We're big Army of Darkness fans. We're big Bruce Campbell fans. And, either one of those endings works. What were there any reshot endings that you know of, Jonny, that worked or didn't work for you as on
well,
this
the
kind
one
of
I
level?
thought of when you asked that question was 7, because I know that they wanted to just have at the end of 7 when he finally shoots Kevin Spacey, have it just go black and that'd be it. And then they went ahead and shot that little piece in the cop car at the end, and Morgan Freeman's little dialogue narration over it, which I think was much better than just having it cut to black.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Again, I wouldn't have noticed. I think the ending does work. It's, when you see Seymour's hand come out with the electrical wire, it's still of a piece with everything. It's still corny. It's still over the top. And so and then my kids thought it was funny because, Audrey she goes, oh shit, and she blows up.
Yeah.
And then my kids are like, that's it. He just blows up. And I don't know. I thought that worked too. I just think from beginning to end, the movie, it just works. It's just pitch perfect.
Yeah.
So obviously before we get down to our final segment here, were there any other things that you guys wanted to chat about? Any other notes, Dave and Jonny, that you wanted to mention as far as the movie goes that we haven't talked about, or anything you want to bring up?
Not really. I mean, I would say it's awesome how diverse the cast was. I mean, this cast is just like all over the place, between the singers and the main characters, and there's just all kinds of people in this movie, and mixing it up with a big giant plant that eats people. I mean, it's just it's kind of one of a kind, and especially for that moment in time.
Yeah, Jonny, any final thoughts on the movie?
No, I think it's just overall a really good time.
Yeah, really fun. Okay, so I mean, at the end, Dave, obviously what we do is we kind of come down to, is this worth remembering or is this worth a remake? As far as should it, with all the remakes and all the fan services stuff and all the reboots and the redos of everything, if you heard that this movie was being redone, is that something that you would get upset about? I mean, what do you feel? Do you think this should be remade? Do you think this should be remembered as is?
Haven't there been rumors of a remake of this for a little while now? I think that it's kind of being developed. Yeah, and I just don't see how it would work. And I'm not against remakes. I'm not one of those people that's totally anti-remake. I certainly don't think it's necessary to remake it. But I also just don't see how it would work. They'd have to just come up with a completely different take on the idea of a killer plant that eats people and somebody getting tricked into feeding it. I don't even know if it could be a musical. I don't know that songs like this and singing like this translate to the 21st century in any real way. But I don't know. I guess it could be fun, but I think it's perfect as is.
Right. I agree with you. Jonny, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with David. I think it's definitely worth remembering. This is one of a kind movie, and I think it has its own place, and it is what it is, and it's well done. From every aspect is well done. So I think it should be left alone the way it is.
Well, it came out as the 1960 non-musical version, black and white kind of horror black comedy, and then the next iteration of it was a musical. And so if you're going to you can redo the same story. I just don't see the point of just doing the same music over again.
Yeah.
I don't see the point of, I mean, if you're going to do it, try to maybe spin it to something different so it's not a musical, just so it seems like a new experience. And it's just like you guys said, it's a really fun time. It's for 90 minutes, there's a lot that happens. That's another thing that I wrote down, is this is 90 minutes. This feels like a 3-hour movie. Not that I was not enjoying it. It was just, there's so much happening, and it's
packed.
Yeah. It's so involving, and the only weakness I would say is, when Seymour starts feeding the plant, and then it cuts to the John Candy scene, and he's already got the bandages on his fingers, and it kind of jumps the timeline a little bit and starts telling us that he's become a celebrity. But other than that, I don't think there's anything in this movie that could be bettered. I don't know if putting it in the real world would help it. I love the boxed in quality and the stagey, even though it feels like a play, it's not shot like a play. It still feels like an actual full-blooded movie. And I don't know, again, why has this not been a bigger part of my life? Why haven't why don't I watch this, constantly? It's just that kind of movie where it's just pitched at the right level, and I love it. I just love it. I mean, it's definitely worth remembering for me. So
I was wondering the same thing after I rewatched it last night. Like, why don't I watch this movie all the damn time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just fun. I don't think my kids would have a problem with that at all. So.
Well, I used to watch the dentist scenes all the time. So,
oh my gosh, yeah. Just I'm still gonna die if I watch those scenes 100 times. Steve Martin, we talked about a lot on the podcast. Everybody's just pitched so perfectly here. So again, Little Shop of Horrors, good choice, Dave. We appreciate it. So again, thank you for coming on and chatting with us. I get nervous because a lot of these people that I listen to, I look up to them and I admire them so much that it's like, these guys are coming and they're chatting with us. And so listening to your few episodes over the past days, it's like, I stopped being nervous and I was just like, I just want to talk to this guy. I was telling my wife, like, I just want to sit and I want to talk to Dave. I mean, he sounds like a blast just being able to sit down with him. And so I tried to make it so that people could understand kind of what your podcast is all about without completely ripping you off. If you could tell people, and the people that listen to us and haven't quite come over to your side yet, how do people listen to you? What do you want to tell people to kind of come into your corner and become fans of yours?
Sure. Well, yeah, piecing it together, like we've kind of mentioned, is a podcast about movies and the movies that inspired them. And so each conversation leads to a great list of other movies worth checking out that share, whether it's similar themes or similar filmmaking styles or just ideas or whatever it is, different connections we can make between the current movie that we are covering and movies that are similar in some way. And you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
Were there any episodes that you're particularly proud of that you'd like people to maybe start off with or make sure they are refreshed with?
It's always so hard to pick. I mean, number one is make sure you've seen the movie, because of course we get into lots of spoilers, but I really had fun talking about Dune earlier this year. That was a great one. I really enjoyed that one. And our episode on licorice pizza that's coming out next week is a really, really fun conversation, I think. So yeah, lots of movies. Just make sure you've seen the movie first.
Yeah, absolutely. Johnny, did you have any final questions for Dave?
licorice pizza's on my list, so I'm gonna have to watch the movie first before I listen to the episode. But sure.
And again, it's great because I know that you talk about how you're not a huge blockbuster person, and Johnny and I are not really blockbuster people. We used to see everything, and so just like I said, being able to pick and choose from all these, from the biggest blockbusters to the like foreign movies to like the smallest budget movies, and even classics, like when you talk about what was you Breaking It Apart? Is that where you talk about Jaws and Wizard of Oz and Halloween and The Big Lebowski, and you're able to look at classics and kind of figure out what makes them work. And so again, I can't recommend your podcast enough. It's just a blast, and you always have so many entertaining guests, and it's such fun conversations, and you're not afraid to poke fun at each other. So again, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you, Dave.
Well, if you guys ever want to join me for an episode, I'd love to have you on.
Oh, absolutely. You need to put you need to put us on a list. We'd love to jump on. That would be great.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Somebody talking to you?
Oh, no. Excuse me.
Excuse me, what?
Excuse me, doctor.
That's better. Nice plan. Big.
Shouldn't we be leaving now? Sorry, doctor. Sorry, doctor.
And again, we'd like to thank our special guest, David Rosen, for gracing us with his presence and obviously getting to chat with a movie that chat about a movie that should have been a stronger go-to movie, I guess you could say, something that should be part of our life. Like, wouldn't you? Isn't that something we talked about? Wouldn't that be something you agree with about Little Shop of Horrors?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, it was always on my radar. It was always something that I knew about and that I watched actually quite often. I mean, when I was younger anyway, just never really latched onto it like other movies.
Right. I think it's just one of those things that you see maybe when you're younger and you don't realize just how great it is until you have more adult sensibilities and able to pick up on things.
Right.
So again, I want to thank David for being able to gear us toward a really fun conversation about that movie. It kind of sparked something in me because talking about my kids watching the movie and all the murders and the dismembering that was going on, and my wife and I never even we looked at each other once, but it didn't really occur to us to turn the movie off because, it's all in good fun. It's about like a sentient plant, like that's not really realistic. It's, they break into musical numbers. And so the violence and the ripping apart of and bodies and feeding bodies to giant plants, it's kind of fun, and it's all just a piece with that. So it reminded me of movies when I was a kid. I know that you and we watched R-rated movies, and our parents let us get away with that. But sometimes there were PG movies that felt like we were getting away with something. Movies that, before the PG-13, before the R rating, it just felt like, they were slipping little dark things or little sexual innuendo things into the movie that really shouldn't be for kids' minds, or really shouldn't be, or maybe were a higher level than a PG-rated movie. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you, I was allowed to watch things I probably shouldn't have seen when I was a kid, but it just kind of became the norm. And we're not that they like purposely let us watch it. It was just kind of like we're just watching it as a family and just happened to see these things. And it was never really like, oh, well, don't watch that.
Right. And in the middle of like a party or a family gathering, some movies obviously will be a little extreme, and your parents will tell you to turn that off.
Yeah, of course. And the rating system has changed over the years too. Like you said, a lot of things got slipped in when they really shouldn't have been.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of, again, my mom let me watch mostly anything, but reading like Stephen King books, even in the middle of, junior high school, and all the things that King put in there that really kids should not be reading.
Yeah.
And you would read something in there like a bit of violence or a bit of sex or something like that, and you'd like, and look around to make sure, like, is anybody seeing what I'm doing? Like, am I getting away with something? So just movies like that. And so I thought about talking about maybe not our top three, but three movies from our childhoods that maybe did slip something by and were a little darker or were a little more violent or innuendo-ish. So how about that? How would that be for an outro topic?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay. So the first one that I have is, I don't really have like a movie pinned down, but I'm going to say James Bond.
Okay.
Because when I was growing up, I think I mentioned before, my mom wanted me to enjoy all the things that growing boys enjoy, like Transformers or Godzilla or James Bond. But James Bond, he's a sex pest. He's a killer. Like, he sleeps with all the women that he wants. He throws them away when he doesn't need them anymore. Same thing with the bad guy, shoots and kills whoever he wants. So he's a violent, misogynist character, and there are, especially the title sequences in every James Bond movie. But it's one of those things where I remember taking our mutual friend Jenny to see GoldenEye, and she'd never seen a James Bond movie before. And that was the first James Bond movie that I was able to make my own and see in a theater instead of my mom introducing me to it. And so I remember sitting there with her, and she was giggling at the silly stuff about the opening sequence. But then when which is a very risque opening title sequence, especially compared. And so I remember she reached over and covered my eyes like I wasn't supposed to see this. And I just laughed because that's James Bond. Like, when you were growing up, your parents show you that, and, dads are addicted to James Bond and their kids know all about this stuff and slip in and out of rooms. So James Bond is just one of those things where I guess they hide it well enough that they don't get too graphic with it, but it's there, and it's kind of enticing for like a growing boy. What do you think, James Bond wise?
I was never a huge fan, but I did watch the movies. I did enjoy them, although I didn't get really involved in them. But I will say, yes, you're right. The opening sequences are kind of risque. They have those, silhouette, naked women thing going on. But I never really paid much attention to it. I never really thought much of it. It was just the title sequence. You know what I mean? I just didn't think much of it. But my wife's a big James Bond fan, so we have all the movies. But my kids haven't seen them yet, so maybe we'll keep it that way.
Right, and those silhouettes and the openings—that's just part of the fabric of the movie. It's just, it's just James Bond. It's what you're going to get. So, what would be your first pick for a movie that you kind of felt like you were getting away with something?
Sure, yeah. My first pick would have to be 16 Candles. This is a movie that I watched with my friend, and I remember the very next day going back home and saying, I watched this movie, and it had this like naked shower scene, and I kind of felt guilty about watching it. And she's like, "What's it rated?" And I said, "PG." And she was like, "Oh, well, just don't watch it again." I was like, okay. And what's funny is before I watched it, I remember thinking, isn't this rated R? Like, I thought it was rated R for some reason, but we watched it. It had that scene. It had that scene with, what's his name, holding the panties up in the bathroom to show that he'd been with Molly Ringwald's character or whatever, even though he hadn't. Anyway, it was a movie that always had these, sexual innuendos in it that were, not for kids, and it was rated PG. And so kids were watching it. And,
yeah. So it's kind of, there's a sexual awakening going on in some John Hughes, maybe all John Hughes movies, that kind of woven into the movie like that. And again, as kids, we don't really pick up on what that kind of stuff means until we grow into them and they become, we start to see ourselves in those characters.
Yeah.
So that's a good choice, 16 Candles. So my second choice, when I think about movies that push that limit, obviously we think about where the PG-13 came from. And, the 1-2 punch of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins coming out in 1984, they weren't rated PG-13, but that did kind of spark controversy and spark the talk about making an in-between kind of rating. And that's Spielberg for you. He pushes those limits in a way that makes it kind of okay for kids, makes kids being able to enjoy it. Our family calls it kind of scary, like fun scary, not scary scary. Mm-hmm. And so Gremlins is one that I mentioned, and I kind of wanted to talk about that one because we did talk about Gremlins 2 quite a bit in our Joe Dante Explorers episode.
Right.
And I talked about how much I like that one as like a Hell's a Poppin' type comedy, kind of satirizing the original. But we didn't really talk about that original movie, which for a Christmas movie, it is very dark natured. The creatures run around, they're biting people, they're scratching people. I think in Chris Columbus's original script, the mom, like Billy Pelcher's mom, is supposed to have her head cut off by the gremlins and put on a Christmas plate or something like that. But it is. I would categorize it as gory. Like the gremlins are put in a microwave. They are put in a blender, and instead of it being like red blood, like human blood, it's like green viscera, green goo, and so it's gory, but it's like fantasy silly gory. So, but even then, that's still a pretty dark. The final scene in that the mall or the store or whatever, where Spike and Gizmo are facing off, and Spike comes out of the water or whatever, and he's all like melting, and so it's a very scary adult kind of thriller, but with like a little kid sheen. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. By the way, Spike was my favorite character in the Gremlins. I would agree with you. It was kind of gory, but like you say, silly. And so that's how I always thought of it, was just a silly, like you said, green goo. But I mean, I always enjoyed that movie. I didn't really think it was too scary for young kids. I mean, I'd probably show it to my kids.
Yeah, just they'd see how they react to kind of the scariness of it. So it's a fun one. Yeah. So what was your second pick then?
Okay, well, speaking of Steven Spielberg, I would pick Poltergeist, although I don't think he directed that one, right? That was Tobe Hooper.
Yeah, I think the controversy with that they always talk about is I think Spielberg was making E.T. at the time, and so he was present during the movie because that's kind of his baby. He cracked the story, and I think he co-wrote the screenplay. And then Hooper was there as the director. So it's kind of up in the air. Some people say that Hooper directed it, and some people say Spielberg did, but Spielberg definitely had his hand on it. But you can tell, I don't know, like Tobe Hooper's always been, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is probably the most terrifying movie I've ever seen. And it's not because it's gory, because famously Hooper tried to shoot it for a PG, and he hid the gore, and he made you imagine what was going on, and that because of how terrifying the experience was, that's when the MPAA slapped it with an R rating and said, we can't let this pass. You know what I mean? But Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not. It's not nearly as gory as everybody says it is. It's not one of those video nasties, because it is very artful in the way that it hides its violence. But it is terrifying. It's not fun. It's like it's shot like a snuff film. It feels like you're watching a kind of a camcorder recording of murders that happen somewhere in the Midwestern United States. Poltergeist is different. Poltergeist has that fun kind of glossy sheen to it. What were parts of Poltergeist that really pushed the limit for you?
Yeah, I mean, Poltergeist always left like just this. I had this feeling after watching it every time, like just this uneasiness that would just stay with me, and I always, attributed that to the movie because it was, a scary movie. But anyway, the moments I can think of are, I know there's a moment where the young boy almost gets eaten by a tree or something like that, and that always, terrified me as a young kid. And then just the old lady, the one who holds the seances, and just the way she talked, and just the whole vibe of the movie was creepy to me, and it always kind of creeped me out.
Right. The part that, well, other than the clown part, the part that just ripped me to pieces was the part where the investigator goes into the bathroom or whatever, and he imagines himself like ripping off his face and like flesh is, and he like rips it off, so there's a skeleton underneath. And I remember going, I shouldn't be watching this. Like, it freaked me out.
Right.
But
there's a moment in the second Poltergeist where Craig T. Nelson was like, vomiting up the tequila worm.
Yeah.
And that always, stuck with me too, but that's in the second one.
Right. But again, it's like at the end, they kind of defeat the evil and they work as a family. It has those Spielbergian elements. It's actually, that one scene in the bathroom is more violent than anything in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's funny, but I just think that they have a good kind of sheen, and it works as as entertainment, I think.
Yeah. But then it also has the curse of other Poltergeist movies where, cast members or crew members end up dying or something. So there's the whole urban legend behind it as well.
Yeah, there's creepy stuff going on there. So speaking of urban legends, for my third movie, I'm going to go ahead and pick Beetlejuice, which is nobody's idea of a super scary movie. But I just remember for a PG, and again, it's Tim Burton, so there's a different kind of heightened stylism to the movie, I guess you could say. But there are parts, the part where Adam and Barbara, the Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis character, they get killed and they go to where the deceased are waiting, they're taking numbers and waiting to be taken to the other side or whatever. You have the guy that's been run over by a car and they're kind of wheeling him in and out in the room. There's the woman that's been cut in half during the magic show. The guy that I guess he smoked and he fell asleep or something like that. I guess that's the rumor, where he burns into flames. That's kind of funny, scary. But there are also the parts where Adam and Barbara Maitland are trying to scare the Dietzes, Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara, Winona Ryder, trying to scare them out of their house. And there's a part where Barbara, she's hanging in a closet and she rips her face off and there's a skeleton underneath. And then the Dietzes don't notice, and then they walk off, and then they try it again where they open a door and there's Barbara holding Adam's severed head in her hand with a knife. But of course they don't see it. I just remember seeing, and then there's the part where, they meet Beetlejuice for the first time. It's like, nice effing model, where they kind of slip an F word into the movie. But I remember watching those parts thinking, is this PG? How are they getting away with this gruesome stuff? And I guess, I don't know, the MPAA is strange. I guess because it's in good fun and it's lighthearted and you can tell that Adam and Barbara aren't really murdering each other, that kind of thing. I guess that's how they slipped away with all that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little cartoony in the way they do it, so I can kind of see how they get away with it.
Right. Still, it's just interesting that a PG movie has that kind of stuff that in any other instance, and if a director had directed it with any seriousness, they wouldn't have gotten away with it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, okay, so your third choice, what did you pick?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pick the movie Grease, and that's because it definitely is, laden with sexual innuendo and all kinds of things that when I was a kid, I had no idea what they were talking about. And but I watched it all the time. And so it wasn't until later when I got cast in the play Greased that I ended up watching the movie for research, just because I wanted to watch it and see what it was I was getting involved in. Yeah. That I went, whoa, this is heavy with the sex stuff. It was like, and this is rated PG. I was so surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. It's not really hidden. It's Grease Lightning. It's right there in the words that they use. I just remember when they released an anniversary edition of it to theaters, and it was kind of the follow the bouncing ball kind of thing with the lyrics. And I just remember thinking, what I wouldn't give to see mothers and daughters singing Grease Lightning and realize just what they're singing about. But you're right. I mean, the music is so catchy and the performances are everybody's so invested, even though they're 40-year-olds that are supposed to be in high school, that kind of thing, that it's just super fun. And I guess you don't pick up on those things. My favorite story of Grease is I took a screenwriting class in college, And we learn screenplays, like the basis of a screenplay is you have a protagonist with a noble goal. You have an antagonist that opposes that goal. And then the whole movie is about how the protagonist tries to get what he's after while the antagonist tries to keep him from doing that.
Right.
If you were to take Grease and use that as the skeleton of it, Danny Zuko is the protagonist. His noble goal is to have sex with Sandy. And Sandy is the antagonist because she doesn't want to ruin it and doesn't want to have sex. So the whole movie is about how they're trying to, change their personalities or stay who they are. And, Danny kind of cleans himself up at the end, but then Sandy dirtied herself up, and so she dresses in leather like a pink lady. And basically at the end, they get into that car and they fly into the heavens, which exactly what that's saying, what they're going to be doing. It's just so funny that as a 7-year-old, you're singing along to these songs, not knowing what the purpose of the story is.
Right. Yep.
So I don't know. Were there any specifics that you think are really funny in Grease that kids shouldn't be laying their eyes on?
I never knew what this meant, but when what's her name? Channing. What's her name?
Stockard Channing.
Stockard Channing. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's her character name? Like Rizzo.
Yep.
Yeah. When she says "flog your log," I never knew what that meant. So I was always like, "What is she talking about?" But yeah, things like that are in there, and if you don't know, then it kind of goes over your head. But if you do know, it's kind of like, "Whoa, that's something I shouldn't be."
Yeah, and as an adult, you pick up on a lot of those things too, which is funny. So yeah, that's a great pick. Grease that's a good one to end on because I think that's one of the ultimate movies as far as, hey kids, let's watch Grease, and it's all fun and games. It's a fun kid musical with, teens singing and catchy tunes and stuff like that, but you don't realize what it's really talking about. So yeah, exactly. That's a supreme example. Okay. So I guess that kind of wraps our talk up about Little Shop of Horrors and the little dirty things that it gets away with. So for our next episode, technically it was my choice, and I was going to pick this movie because I'm seeing a lot of movies having like a resurgence, like 90s and 80s movies, especially 90s movies, actually, that they're being reassessed and revisited. And some people are like, oh, these are actually masterpieces. Like we never knew because they were just silly and topical at the time. And then some of these I'm like, why? Like it's not, I don't know if it's that good. And then you watch them again and you're like, well, how is this getting reassessed to masterpiece level? Iconography kind of thing. So I wanted to talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 1990. What connection do you have with the Turtles?
Well, not much. I know I did see it when it came out, and I remember thinking that I liked it, or at least going along with everybody else who liked it. I got some of the toys. I know I was kind of into it. But we'll have to watch it again and see what I think as an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one of those movies that I was thinking about it, and I posted some pictures, and we chatted about doing all these things, but I put posted some pictures to Twitter just to see what people thought about the movie and kind of get more input from people that I've talked to lately. And one person in particular basically messaged me saying, "Ooh, do you guys have a guest for that? Like, I would be interested in guesting." His name is Kevin Brackett, and he's another one of these guys that I've been listening to forever. He co-hosts a podcast called Real Spoilers. He's the editor-in-chief for Review STL, stlouis.com. So he's got his fingers in a lot of, like the entertainment business. And he's guested on Binge Movies, which we've talked about before, talking with Jason there about Disney movies and the history of animation. So he knows his stuff. And he's listening to him. He's very smart and very intelligent and very kind of intuitive about the movies he watches. So him coming on and kind of coming into my feed and saying, could I guest? I couldn't turn it down. So I know that you and I were going to chat about that originally. It's just too good of an opportunity. So we're going to have, again, special guest Kevin R. Brackett come on and talk about Ninja Turtles. I think he's got a stronger connection to the movie and to those characters than we have. So I think that'll be a great kind of...
It'll be fun.
Yeah, like an introspective look at that. So again, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 1990 next time. Until then, my name is Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And we'll see you next time in Nostalgiacast, guys.